why Biden is going to be against Israel, and the explanation of the West Bank Annexation, and what does that mean in the present time. Now, Biden has been very clear on a few things, and saying, one, he believes in the two-state solution, and that he believes that Israel needs to return to the 1967 borders. That's called the Green Line. And here is a map of the Green Line. And as you can see, Israel was actually initially created to be separate from the West Bank. And the reason they did that is because they had an idea that Palestine would be a nation, which would include Gaza and the West Bank, and that would be Palestine, and the rest would be Israel. After Israel was created, the United States, that sits on the UN Security Council and gets to veto everything, has basically blocked Palestine from being a nation. So ever since 1947, Palestine has wanted to be a state and has never been allowed to be a state. Now, in 1967, why does Biden say, I want to return to the pre-1967 borders, or the Green Line? What happened in 1967? Well, one of the things that happened is that Israel gained the Golan Heights. The international community is incensed about this and continually says you need to return that land to Syria. Now, most of us, growing up doing our U.S. history classes and civics and things in high school, we never really were taught some of the factors going on, because we've always been taught, this is how things were being done. Countries expand through war. We can see that from Germany in World War II. They were expanding, trying to get additional territory, and then they lost the war. And we divided it up. Now, here's the issue as it pertains to this. Conquest. In international law, the acquisition of territory through force, especially by a victorious state, in a war at the expense of a defeated state. An effective conquest takes place when physical appropriation of territory, annexation, is followed by subrogation, i.e. the legal process of transferring title. Now, they have wanted to do this with the Golan Heights for years. Okay? And again, that's conquest. Did you know that the Charter of the United Nations and international law forbids conquest? The Charter of the United Nations. For the Draft Declaration on Rights and Duties of States, formulated in 1949 by the International Law Commission of the United Nations, contained in Article 11 the rule that states are obligated not to require recognized territorial acquisitions achieved by aggressive war. So the fact that Israel obtained the Golan Heights from war, which we look at because we've been dealing with this forever in our life and seeing how this happened through history, we are never really taught that that is now against international law. So we see what they did in Golan Heights and say, what you do? They won it, right? You're not allowed to do that. It's against the Charter of the United Nations. So every nation there looks at it and says, this is part of the agreement to be part of this organization, and you violated it. Now, one of the things that has happened, and I don't want to get to the Oslo Accords or anything, but too much in detail, but they divided the West Bank in three categories. Category A, full civil and security control by the Palestinian Authority. It's only 18% of the land. Entry into this area is forbidden to all Israeli citizens. Now, what's important to those of us who follow faith, or as Christians in some way, is that includes the city of Bethlehem and 80% of Hebron, which includes the cave of the patriarchs, where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, is in Hebron. That's controlled by the Palestinians. That's a problem. Category B, Palestinian civil control and joint Israeli-Palestinian security control. About 22% of the land, was about 25% when they started. And Category C, full Israeli civil and security control. Now that's where this thing is really kind of coming from. Now, when they did this, nothing changed. Israelis were allowed to move in, and they can go do settlements in the West Bank. It's problematic, and the international community sees this as very problematic. But considering the fact that this thing has always been annexed and supposed to be part of the state of Palestine, they basically said, okay, I'm going to be a Jewish person in the state of Palestine, as far as the international community is still concerned about it. This is where the problem comes in. Right now, they are wanting to annex. And before I even get to there, I need to go back to one of the things that happened in the last few days of the Obama presidency, Biden being vice president. In December 16, 2016, after the election, Trump had won but had not taken office. The U.S. abstained from the Security Council vote, which was a unanimous vote with U.S. abstaining. The United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334, which states, Israel's settlement activity constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and has no legal validity. Demands that Israel stop such activity and fulfill its obligations as an occupying power under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Now, that's the thing that happened as Biden left office. Now we need to look at what is presently happening. And what is presently happening is that Israel is about ready to annex a huge segment of the West Bank, 30% of it. Now, this has already been opposed by the Democratic leaders. It's been opposed by Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Dianne Feinstein, and of course the international community is obsessed about this and incensed about this. Just yesterday, the United Nations came out with a statement against this annexation. Now, Netanyahu made this one of his political things as to his election, that he would annex the West Bank. It's not just the annexation, and here's what he is proposing to annex. Did you notice that isolates the rest of the West Bank? It cut off the border of Jordan. And so therefore, it has totally encapsulated the rest of the West Bank inside of Israeli borders. And here it is again, so you can see it again, just to make sure. And so because of this, Jordan is incensed. And of course, the Palestinians are going to be incensed. And when you annex it, they're saying this is now part of Israel proper. Therefore, it cannot be part of the two-state solution. Who is a proponent of the two-state solution? Biden is. And Israel is saying this is now part of Israel. It will not be part of the two-state solution. That is, of course, just incensing the international community. Netanyahu wants to do this because he has said this is the only chance we have to do this over the next 50 years because Trump has given us tacit approval. Well, yeah, but it's right before an election, months before an election. And he's going to try this stunt, and this annexation is just hours away. And what it says to the United Nations is you have always had this idea of a two-state solution. That's over. The borders that you wanted us to use for that two-state solution, that's over. Because we will never give Palestine that amount of thing, as well as we have totally isolated it. If we want to stop all aid going in there, we can do that. We have that right. They may have that ability currently, but they've not annexed it and made it part of Israel before. And that's the huge issue. And so as you can imagine, as soon as Biden takes office with the United States and puts an ambassador for the United Nations, the U.S. is either going to abstain or they're going to vote against Israel on this annexation. And while they're at the annexation, because Biden's already said he wants to go back to the pre-1967 borders, that includes the Golan Heights. Give it back. Now, as Biden and the United Nations is going to be considering things, they're not going to be doing anything other than saying, return it to its pre-border time. One of the things that's interesting is when we look at the prophecies, it's not going into south of Israel. the attack is not going to the south of Israel. Why is that? Because they don't. That's not their goal. Their goal is just to return the land so the Palestinians can have a nation. And that is, of course, the problem. It's not theirs. And, of course, it was never Israel's to give up on the two-state solution anyway, especially as it pertains to Hebron. Hebron, the birthright went not to Judah, the birthright went to Joseph and then to Ephraim. Ephraim has been out in the nations lost for all this time. Judah doesn't have the ability to give up the birthright. That's not theirs to give up for Hebron and the cave of the patriarchs. So I hope this is kind of giving you an idea of why the attack is going to come against Israel, why I see this coming up incredibly soon, and again, once they do that, why the abomination of desolation would occur. Because if they're actually putting an altar up on the Temple Mount, one of the things from the international community is stop that. That belongs to the Palestinians and to the Muslims. You can't be doing that. So they're going to stop that sacrifice going on. So I don't know how vocal they're going to be. In other words, are they going to be televising it? I doubt it. I always thought most of us would think that they would televise it. They may not. But they're going to stop that sacrifice going on. And again, I think when Israel feels attacked, they're going to turn back to God and try to start that altar sacrifice. But again, this is, Biden is very clearly on record of that he wants this land going back to 67 borders. Again, as part of the Obama presidency, that was the last thing that they did to condemn Israel over this. All they have to do, if they see this annexation taking place, which negates the two-state solution, to say, that's not acceptable, you've got to give it back. And that allows them to come in. And that's all we need to see. And again, that's what's happening within hours. I mean, the last proposal on the annexation came out within the last 24 hours. And Israel is moving forward with this annexation. They are moving forward. We have just months to a U.S. election. I think the Democrats are going to win. If Trump wins, he may still say, no, this is not acceptable, because Congress is so incensed about it. It is something that's going to rile up the international community. And if the international community starts seeing them do an altar on the Temple Mount, they'll lose support of all the Christians. And so the world is against them. It's just a question of how incensed at the start of this are they. And does the sacrifice start before or after the condemnation and when all the nations move against? And that's Zechariah 14:2. All the nations are coming. This is not Armageddon. This is pre-Armageddon for Zechariah 14:2. All the nations. That would be defined as United Nations. It meets the standard of the verse. It's very quickly approaching us. We have just months ahead of us.